Welcome back to the ATI podcast. Barrett here, back for episode 132. We got a very special episode ahead for you here, and my guest this week is Sean of GLOM. How are we doing, Sean?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Hey, man, I'm doing wonderful. I'm so excited to have you on the show. We were talking a little bit before we started recording tonight, and I always like to let our audience know how I stumble upon artists, and I think it's beneficial for the artists to know that as well as a little bit of market research. And this one's not as exciting maybe to some people, but it was on a recommended playlist on Spotify, and I don't frequent those as much as I used to, quite frankly, but it just so happened to hit me at the right time, kind of summer vibes. I heard Glass, and immediately I was enamored. I needed to know more. I needed to hear more. So then I started following you on social media and kind of noticed your social media presence on Instagram in particular. That's my big social media platform, as our listeners know. And man, I just really loved the content that you were doing, some of the covers that you were doing. And the thing that really struck a chord with me as a fan, you did a duet with your dad, I believe. It was a Beatles song, if memory serves me correct. And boy, that just hit me right in the heartstrings because, you know, I'm a musician myself. My dad, I get that from him. He was a musician, family of musicians. So it was just kind of like a special moment. You know, it's just kind of, I remember those times jamming with dad and, you know, it's really great.
Well, that means a lot, you know. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Let's get that out of
Absolutely.
the way, you know. Not get out of the way, you know what I mean. But feel like when you bring up that particular video, it is funny because my dad, you know, he taught me how to play guitar to the best that he could because he's not really a guitar player. He's a pianist. But when I was like 11 years old, we can get into this a little more in depth later. But when I was 11 years old, I really wanted to learn how to play the guitar. And he was like, okay, like I'll teach you as much as I know. Like I don't know how to play like lead guitar or anything. I can just show you like chords. He knows like every chord, but he, you know, that's pretty much it. And he taught me that. And I think that like something clicked at that age because he taught me all these chords. And then once I had all the chords down, like that was when things got kind of crazy. Like I was just like, I'd never had the guitar out of my hands, like from, you know, being like from like 11 years old until like now. So I've been playing guitar for like 20 years, so almost 21 years. And the Beatles were our shared thing because you don't really think about it. I feel like when you're a kid listening to music, specifically like the Beatles or something that has like immense cultural significance like that, you don't really quite realize why you like it. I just feel like when I was a kid, like we would listen to, you know, he would drive me to school sometimes and he would be having like, he had all the Beatles CDs in his car and we would listen to the Beatles. And I remember like this was probably when I was like 6 or 7 years old before I started playing guitar and I like knew all the songs and I would sing all the songs like along with him. And then by the time when I was like 11, like before I started learning how to play guitar, 11, you know, 12, before I was like, you know, playing guitar, I kind of feel like I pushed it away where I was like, this is like lame, like the Beatles are lame, right? And then, you know, when I was in high school, I was like, it started to click again where I was like, oh man, like this is actually really special. Like there's something about this and I don't know what it is, but there's something about this music that makes you feel a certain way. And I think that, you know, as an adult now and like, you know, he's getting older and like we, you know, when I do go back to visit them, which isn't that often anymore, but like when I go back and visit them, like we always try to sneak in a little time to play Beatles songs because that's what we did when he was teaching me how to play guitar. And so it's funny to, you know, pick the guitar up and just play some songs. He always wants to go he's like such a super Beatles fan that he's always trying to like play. If I say like, hey, let's make a video, he always wants to pull out some deep cut that I like, but
Yeah,
I'm like, dude, like we can't play some of these deep cuts on there. Like no one knows those songs, you know,
sure,
like
sure,
those are like
yeah,
really
yeah,
too deep, you know, even though the Beatles are like, you know, the biggest band ever, but there's still songs
sure,
that people don't know. And I
yes,
think that
yes,
he always wants to play a song that's like either one, way too difficult, or two, it's something that it's not like a well known song. And so I
sure,
always have to try to like steer him away from
yeah.
the harder pulls, you know?
You bring up a good point about the Beatles too, and the fact that a lot of people, I again before our time, of course, but you don't understand the cultural significance that they had at the time, the
Right.
impact that they had at the time. Even if you talk to people alive at the time, it just doesn't convey. I mean, I know probably in our lifetimes there's been artists similar that we could point to with a cult following such as, but they did it before many other artists did. So there's that
Right.
part. And then I remember I had a very similar trajectory with them as a fan as well. Like when I was younger, I heard them and I was like, it's good, but whatever, but it's not the thing that I was into at the time. I was probably like into like Eve 6 or,
Right. Right.
311 or something like that at the
Right.
time as a younger kid. But once I got into high school and started playing more music and stuff, and I started as a drummer and I learned guitar, so then I had started to get a real appreciation for melody and things like that.
Right.
Then the Beatles meant a little something different at that time.
Oh yeah.
And then I took a rock history course in college. We had a little segue on Beatles for a little while.
Right.
At the time, I just so happened to have been doing some deep cuts. Like I got the expanded version of the White Album,
Right.
so like that's perhaps one of my favorite albums of all time.
Right.
Just a fantastic album, but again, you start to learn those layers of complexity and how good of an artist that they are. But they connect with people on different reasons to bring this back around. So there was the happy pop melody aspects of it as a younger, in my youth that I look back on fondly. But my first daughter, I wanted to name her Prudence for Dear Prudence.
Wow.
That's just the connection I have with the Beatles. I just love them. They're just great, great, great band too.
Similarly, I took, you know, one of those kinds of courses in school, and it was funny to really, even if you have a teacher that's, because like there's definitely like some people, especially on the academic level, that you either love the Beatles or you don't like, or you hate them. And I had a
Right.
teacher that was not a Beatles fan. Like he was, but then the irony of it was like he admitted that it was like, well, all of the bands that I like better than the Beatles would not exist without the Beatles. And then he was like, we were like, who was your favorite band? And then he was like, oh, like Radiohead. And it's like, okay, well, Radiohead, like
Okay. Definitely.
I used to have this theory in college at that time that I should probably, I'm not an academic at all, but I should probably write this. I've been thinking about writing a lot of papers recently, and I think that
Yeah.
this is a theory that I had back then that I think still resonates today. And the theory is if you look at any successful rock or alternative rock band, and I'm not speaking from a pop sense per se, like pop, like modern pop rock right now, like I don't think that is super relatable to the Beatles, but you can pinpoint it essentially to any specific era of the Beatles trajectory or their career rather. Like for example, like I remember at that time I was listening to the White Album a lot, and the song "Sexy Sadie." When you hear that song, it's like, yo, this is exactly like Paranoid Android or like that
Sure.
era of Radiohead. And then like for example, another to go in another direction, it's like the Smiths, right? This is a direct quote that I read in the Johnny Marr uh, memoir autobiography or whatever, and he said
Yeah.
that there would be no Smiths without the Beatles song "What You're Doing," which is, I mean, it's not a very well known Beatles song. I like that song a lot. I don't think it's the best Beatles song, but I appreciate it for what it is
Sure.
because of the riff, the guitar riff that happens in the song is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the first uses of like this very specific sound of like the jangle pop thing, which this
Yeah.
record was 65, so it's still like Beatlemania, like peak Beatlemania. And
Right.
then you hear that and you're like, oh yeah, that's the Smiths, that sound. That's the Stone Roses sound. That's the,
Yep.
if you can even say Oasis if you want, but Oasis is definitely
Yeah,
like
to a degree.
all over the board with Beatles stuff. So, but like
Yeah.
specifically like the jangly guitar, like melody thing was from them. And then you could go any direction. There's like so many other ways that you can dissect that particular statement. But I remember like thinking back then, especially with those two bands, because I'm like obsessed with the Smiths and I'm obsessed with Radiohead, that those two
Yeah.
particular things definitely line up with Beatles. I mean, also they're British, so it's a whole nother thing, but because we don't, granted, we have our idea of what the Beatles means to the United States as far as a cultural stand,
Right.
but just imagine what it's like over there, where it's like, it's still a really big moment,
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
when I was a kid, my sister married a Scottish guy, and we went to her wedding when I was in 8th grade, and we went to Abbey Road, and we
Oh,
went
nice.
to, this is a real niche one, that we went to Savile Row where they did the last show, or like the roof
Mhm.
sessions, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that building, the Abbey Road building, obviously Paul McCartney owns Abbey Road now, so it's a whole nother thing. And there's a plaque outside. I don't think at that time he owned Abbey Road though, but there was a plaque
Mhm.
that was like a Beatles plaque, because it was like, this is where the Beatles recorded everything, which is crazy. And then
Yeah.
like the gate there is like completely crushed out in graffiti of just like Beatles graffiti,
Wow.
like people like writing like, you don't like you everything that you did means so much to me, like stuff like that, and it's just like completely
Yeah.
covered. And then with the Savile Row studio that they did Let It Be at, which is my favorite record, by the way, I'm just going to put that on the, just so we're all on the same page. But that one did not, like, I don't think that building is still, it wasn't a music studio to begin with, but because that was the Apple office,
Right.
and it's like a fashion office, but there's still a plaque outside. It's like, this is where the last live Beatles performance was. And it was like, it had a date. It was like January something,
Very
1969.
cool.
It's just like that, like those little things. And it's like, that's just two examples of like national landmark situation that happened in the UK,
Right. Yeah. Definitely. I'm a big fan of the show Trash Theory on YouTube. I don't know if you ever checked that out.
No, never heard.
Guy does highly recommend, man. If you're into like music history, formations of bands, just this niche story about how this album came together, so on and so forth. But there was a lot of talk, like kind of on that Radiohead subject, especially early on. They were just like how the big reason for their shift to electronic music was because they basically ran out of Pixies songs to
Right,
rip off.
right.
Allegedly was the direct
Yeah.
quote from them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, but you can definitely see some of that Beatles influence on them as well. But yeah, man, that would be a dream situation for me to go to Abbey Road for sure, man. Just that would be incredible to
Well,
actually
they didn't
witness
let
that
us
in
in. We
person.
couldn't go inside, but like
Ah,
just from literally outside, just seeing it and being
yeah,
like, this is crazy. Because like, I don't know, I even at that point, like I was obsessed with all the lore about the Beatles and everything like that too. Because it's like,
yeah,
you look up, because Abbey Road's not that big. It's not like a big building at all. It's more like a wide building, and like the studios are
right.
like, ground level essentially. And like you can look up and see the roof, and it's like, oh my god, like that's the roof where like George Martin brought John Lennon out during the Sgt. Pepper sessions where he was on acid, and they thought he was going to jump off the roof because he was like tripping so hard. And I was like looking at that in 8th grade and being like, that's crazy. I don't know.
that's
I could talk
that's
about them
fantastic.
all for hours. That's the problem. There's so much
Yeah. Oh
lore.
no, I right there with you, man. So we've mentioned some of the family members, of course. I'm curious to get in kind of your background and your upbringing. I know you mentioned that your dad was a pianist. So, I mean, obviously, how people come to music, there's usually a family story or element behind that, or at least a family friend or whatever the case is. So it just kind of, did you grow up in Washington, D.C. area?
Yes,
Is that where you're originally from?
I grew up in the DC area, and it's important to note, like right off the bat, that when I was in music, like I was like performing music in church since I was like 8 years old. Like my dad was a pianist, but he was also like the choral director at this church that we went to when I was a kid, and he got me in the like choir, like not no choice, like I had to do it.
Yeah,
And
heard.
he I didn't even really like know how to sing. I guess like I just had like natural pitch or something, but like I would just like sing these songs. And so I remember like early on, like there's a video of me as like a kid. I was probably 7 or 8, and I like sang. I think it was like it was at his birthday party, and I sang "Help," like the Beatles song "Help." But I also sang a lot of church songs too, in like these like choir recitals and stuff like that. And then a little later, I wanted to learn how to play guitar, and that was pretty much how it is. But like I come from a musical family. Like my dad is a musician, obviously, and my both of my aunts on my dad's side, one of them is the choir director was the choir director at a church in Richmond, and then the other one was just in the choir. And then my dad has a brother as well, and he doesn't like do music like semi-professionally or anything, but I remember like he was one of the first people that I ever saw play guitar like in public, because he used to bring his guitar to like Christmas and stuff like that. And I remember like he was from a very, very early age, like he is honestly like a pretty big inspiration to the way I play guitar now, because back then, he was playing like fingerstyle guitar, but not like he would be playing like chord melodies of like Christmas songs, right? And I remember like
Mm-hmm.
seeing him do it, and in my opinion, what's funny about it is that there's definitely like a line with guitar where I think that if you're too good at guitar, it's like hard to watch for me personally. Like,
Sure.
I don't know like how
Yeah.
to really describe that without sounding like, I don't want to be a jerk, but like I think that if you're like playing especially fingerstyle guitar and like playing melodies and stuff, like I think you need to like dumb it
Yeah.
down like a little bit. And he would play guitar fingerstyle with like just like this with like two fingers. And I don't want to get, I don't know how technical you want to get with like the guitar thing, but like when you like learn how to play classical guitar, like you watch YouTube videos of like people like instructing how to like do proper like fingerstyle technique, you got to be playing with all
Yeah.
four,
Right.
sometimes even your pinky. And I just like
Right.
remember watching him play with these two, with his thumb and his index, and then sometimes this, and I was like, that is what I want to play guitar like. And I didn't even like realize that until now, because I've been doing a lot of like these like little exercises where I try to learn how to like play songs that I like at the same time, like the melody and the
Right.
backing at the same time. And I was just dumbing it down to this. And I was like, this is the way that he would play the guitar when I was a kid. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And also
Sure.
my dad plays guitar like that too. He doesn't really finger pick like real. He just like finger picks like this,
Mhm.
because ironically he taught my uncle how to play guitar. So that's a whole other like thing. Cause
Yeah.
they're just playing like this. Like they're like doing the hook, which is, it's a whole nother sub technique, but that's just that,
Yeah, now that you pointed it out, I did notice you kind of strumming like that some in some of those video covers that you were doing with the acoustic guitar, and I didn't really pick up on that before, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, you're pulling it off still.
Hey, I appreciate that.
But yeah, I think kind of the classical guitar playing, the flamenco style or whatever. Anytime anybody talks about that, my mind goes to Lindsey Buckingham of
Yeah.
Fleetwood
Yeah.
Mac. He's an insane guitarist.
Very big
Yeah,
inspiration
one
to
of
me
those
as well.
guys. Yeah, one of those guys that can play like that. That is digestible in watching. I mean,
Yes.
I could never play like that, but
Yeah.
I have an appreciation for it because he is making sure that he's implementing the melody along with
Yes.
the chord changes and everything else that's going on. What
Yes.
an incredible guitarist as well.
And he is another one of those that when I was, in my 20s, like watching his guitar playing, I'm like, this is like what I want to do. Like, it's very, very musical, very, very like
Yeah,
particular, and it is also difficult. That's a whole other thing, but like,
sure.
it's not easy to replicate the way that he plays guitar. And I really appreciate that. But it's also not too much, which is another important part of it. It's
Sure.
like the average music listener can hear it. Like, for example, the song Never Go Back, right? On Rumors, which is like
Yep.
the hardest guitar song of all time, in my
Tough.
opinion.
Tough.
Like that song like doesn't sound hard at all, and like it's like kind of like a poppy little folk song, and then you try to learn how to play it, and it's like this is actually incredibly hard. And when you watch him sing it too, it's like that's even crazier,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, it's how he's attacking vocally, like rhythmically, versus what he's playing at the time. It's like
Right.
it's kind of brain breaking if you kind of know what's going on there for sure. I'm sure coming up in church and basically being forced to be involved in the music there, I had a similar experience as well. So I grew up in southern Missouri, so right in the heart of the Bible Belt. A lot of
Right.
evangelical folk in the area.
Right.
So I grew up United Pentecostal.
Okay. Wow.
So kind of similar, being forced into like the singing and I played drums at that church and auxiliary percussion stuff like that. But I feel like, and I'd like to hear this from you as well, that it kind of took. Even though I'm like a pretty nervous guy, I wouldn't necessarily call myself an introvert, but I think by default maybe I am. I think like being forced to play in church kind of helped me be able to press forward and then start, making my own bands, playing my own original music, having a little bit more confidence to do those things though,
Right.
because it forced me to do that thing I didn't want to do. And that was, be front and center in front of people.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I didn't quite ever realize that about myself until right now, because I've never really been uncomfortable speaking to crowds or like performing to crowds, and I think it's just because I started doing it like when I couldn't remember doing it. It's definitely a really nerve-wracking thing. At least, like for me, what's
Sure.
funny is that before shows, the thing that stresses me out about shows is not having to perform to people. It's like the logistics of like the band business side of it, where I'm like, oh my God,
Sure.
like how many people are actually there? Like what is the ticket say? Like all that, like the
Right.
boring stuff.
Sure.
And then when you go out there, that's where I feel more comfortable. It's just like the hours leading up to it that's
Right.
the thing that stresses me out. It's not the like actual
Sure.
performance part, because also like, not to be, pessimistic about, GLOM or whatever, but it's like even when we have like a really bad show, like I feel like it's not as noticeable as it is for the people playing it. Like we had a show where we opened for a band who's one of my heroes called The Starting Line, and the first show
Nice.
of that run was arguably the worst show that we've ever played. Like everything
Oh,
went wrong. Like I we because the shows were at the beach, and like we weren't able to like check into the place that we were staying because we were playing 3 days at the beach. We weren't able to check in to where we were staying until like 3 or 4 o'clock, and then we had to go to the venue and stuff like that after. And so we just went to the beach first, and every piece of gear was just in the car baking, right? And
ah,
then we get to the show, and then like I'm like setting up the guitar, and we like sound check and stuff like that, and like things are like fine. They're not like great as far as like I don't know, like I'm really particular about guitars, and like I want like the guitar to like be I don't know. I think that I have a very annoyingly accurate sense of pitch where like if it's even like minusculely out of tune, like the intonation or whatever on the guitar
yeah.
or vocally
Yeah.
or anything like that, I like notice it a lot more. But then when you watch, like when I see like videos of it, I'm like, oh, you can't even tell. Like you can't even hear the guitar, like the pitch
Sure.
of the guitar. It's just like the
Oh,
force of
yeah.
the guitar, right?
Yeah.
But then at that show, like the first night of that show is like the guitar like was just not staying in tune. Like it was just not like nothing about it was in tune. And then I
Hmm.
broke a string because of the heat, and then like everything just went wrong. But then the rest of the shows were fine. But it was just like that first one was like. But then I don't know what was even funnier about it is that like after that show I was like really discouraged because like we had a good run before where we didn't have a bad show for like a whole year before then, and then
Sure.
I'm at the merch booth after the show, and then like I'm talking to people, and they're like, "Hey, like, really loved the show. Like, like you guys are so sick." And I was like, "This is really funny because to me, that was I would hate that band immediately if I saw myself perform that night."
Sure.
But
Sure.
you're always your worst critic, I guess. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I know that there was definitely times that I would kind of like sit back and not to say like I would wait for bands to fuck up, but like if they did, I kind of cringed for them,
right,
right?
right,
But now, I mean, it's really just how I feel like the artist handles themselves in the moment because everybody's going to face
right,
some random adversity.
right,
Oftentimes, it's not your own fault. The sound guy, an outlet blew, something like that
right,
is typically more routine what I see anymore. It's not necessarily the band's fault, or somebody's going to break a stick, or a stick's going to go flying, for a
right,
drummer, or somebody's going to break a string. It's like how you handle yourself in those moments. I've seen bands like, you know, start a set and then stop. Like, I just saw Spitalfield a couple weeks ago.
hmm
They're back doing reunion dates, and they did an anniversary for an old venue that we used to have down here, and we celebrated that up in St. Louis. So I helped promote that show, and they right away they fucked the song up. I'm like, wait a minute, let's start that back over. And the forecast was opening for them. They did the same thing. The forecast was like, that's the
yeah,
wrong key. Let's start the song back over. So it was. I didn't take away from anybody. Everybody had just a good time. They still had
yeah,
killer sets or whatever, but it's like, they caught themselves in the moment. They fixed it
right,
immediately. And, that's what a pro would do. So,
right,
I do have a different perspective on it nowadays than what I used to, I think, in my younger years for sure.
absolutely. I just think that every opportunity to perform is another opportunity to learn something more
I
about
agree.
how to do it, the craft of playing. And I think that is, this is the first year, like 2024 was the first year that we actually toured. And so, well, because of COVID and stuff like that, we didn't like, because
Right.
we started, this band started like several years ago now, but we didn't like really go on the road and play until this year. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot more in that 1 year than the 4 other years before that we were doing this, you know? And I'm really appreciative of the craft element to
Yeah.
performing, because like watching a band or a solo artist or anyone perform any level of production, it's like this is really hard. It is actually really hard, and so like I applaud anyone that does it because it's crazy. It's a crazy thing to do, and I just want, personally, whenever I see something like that, or I see a show that I really like, or play a show even, like I just want to be able to put on the best show, because it's the most
Absolutely.
important thing to me is that the person that spent their money to come see the show had a good time. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I've been trying to do since the beginning of this year.
I know you practice what you preach, because I think I came across some videos too of you, something to the effect of you always play an extra song because somebody spent their hard-earned money to come see you. And I love that attitude. I think that's a great attitude to have. It's the right attitude to have if you're coming at music with the right spirit.
These years aren't getting easier for people, so I think that it's important to
Sure.
be able to have fun, and like I personally have a lot of fun up there, so I want the people that are watching the show to have a good time. That's the most important thing to me.
Absolutely.
Even if I'm not having the best day, like vocally or whatever, like I
Sure.
just, it's important. It is the most important thing to me,
People come to your show to escape and have a good time, and I know, as again, a musician used to play out, and I'm sure you feel the same. That's your opportunity too, to kind of get up there and work some shit out, and maybe drop the baggage at the door, or maybe you're up there fighting
Right,
it, but you're going to be done with it by the end of the night.
right,
So music has that beautiful ability to kind of solve things for you as well.
right, exactly.
I'm kind of curious at what point you decided to kind of start writing and performing your own music. Kind of where was that at in your timeline?
Well, I would say that I think that the first song I ever wrote was probably the first year I played guitar. Like I was just writing little songs, and I couldn't really like sing and play back then. And I would say like seriously, I started to do it maybe like 13 years old. I like got Fruity Loop Studio, like and I would like
Yeah.
make like I really at a certain point I was really obsessed with like the backpack rap movement. Like I
Yeah.
had a weird like
I hear you.
music trajectory, because like when I was like 11, 12, like I was really into, like I was obsessed with like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and like Nirvana and like the stuff that was on the radio like when we were younger,
Sure.
because like pop radio back then had no guitars in it, so that's why it was like you listen to the alternative station and it has guitars in it, so
Right.
it's like
Right.
it. But then at the same time, what was weird about it is that there were certain pop acts that had guitar, but they were like acoustic guitars, like the Fray, or like who else
Right.
was popular back then, like '06. Let me think, like
Boy, the Frey one, definitely. I remember that. I didn't even remember that band at all until you brought them up. One Republic, that would be another
One
one, probably
Republic
about
was
that
another
time, right?
one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But like when
Of the
I
Oak, right?
when I started listening to like Nirvana was the big one for me, because like I remember like hearing that and I was like, this is like really heavy. I remember like being like, this is very heavy, because that was like the
Yeah.
heaviest thing I'd ever heard back then. Like I heard In Bloom for the first time and I was like, this is like, those guitars are so big, and I've never heard like a song that had like a guitar that big, and the bass was really big, and like stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the trajectory got funny, because at a certain point, I remember like a kid in my class in school showed me Pantera, and I really, really liked Pantera. Like
Hell yeah.
I got really into Pantera in
Do
seventh
you
grade.
remember what it was of Pantera they showed you at first? Was it like Cowboys from Hell, or?
No, it wasn't Cow. Like, truth be told, I don't really. That's not my favorite Pantera song. Like, I think that is like
Really?
one of my least favorite Pantera songs, because I don't like the fast Pantera songs. I like the slow Pantera songs. And so
Okay.
I got really
Yeah,
into like the one of the ones that I really liked was Cemetery Gates,
that was a big one.
like that. And I really liked, but then like my, and this is still one of my favorite songs in general. This Love. Like I remember like the first time I heard that and like in all the breakdowns getting slower, I was like, this is really
Yeah,
cool, you know? And like what's funny about it is that like, obviously people there's like a whole era of guitar player that even today, like in like modern hardcore and like modern like metal and stuff like that, where they like definitely like have like a Dimebag thing going, like not so much
sure.
his solos, but like the tone of the guitar is very similar to Dimebag and like the way that he plays like riffs and stuff like that, whatever. Like
Yeah,
Power Trip, obviously Power Trip is like a Texas,
definitely.
hardcore metal band, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but I
Well,
remember
think
like
about like the plethora of pitch harmonics in like metalcore, even,
right,
and
right.
that those trends in the 2000s. Like that's all goes back to Pantera and the stuff that Dime would do.
I think that was what was funny about it is that this kind of goes into like the way that I play guitar now because I wasn't really like enamored by his guitar solos. I was enamored by the riffs. Like the riffs and the songwriting was the thing that I liked because the
Sure.
songwriting in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, like because like you read anything about Dimebag and you're like, oh, he's obsessed with Van Halen, and like what's the thing about Van Halen that's the most important part of Van Halen, in my opinion, is the fact that he wrote a good song first, and then he like did
Right.
like a crazy guitar solo on top. And then it's like then I started
Absolutely.
listening to Van Halen, and then I listened to Sabbath, and that was when things got like interesting because when I started listening to Black Sabbath, I was like, okay, like this is funny because like this is in a lot of ways this is very similar to like the Beatles, and I don't know if that is like a connection that makes sense to anyone else besides me, but it's
It
like when you
does.
think about it too, they're British, and like the first Black Sabbath
Right.
record, there's like definitely parallels to
Right.
not the way the Beatles would write a song, but like the ideas and like the melody, the way that they would structure
Absolutely.
songs, you know. And then this is where it gets funny because at a certain point, someone showed me. Well, that was when Lupe Fiasco came out, that first
Hell
Lupe
yeah.
Fiasco record, right? And I remember hearing that, and I was like, this is this is like hip hop that I've never heard before. Like, there's something about this, like,
Yeah.
that I'd never, like, I'm slightly too young for like the 90s rap thing and like the
Sure.
90s underground rap specifically. And so, like, this, the Lupe Fiasco stuff back then was very like 90s East Coast, right? And then that's when I got Fruity Loops. So this was like sixth or seventh grade. And I remember like at a certain point, I just like stopped playing guitar, actively playing guitar. I would still use the guitar to like, I would like always noodle and stuff, but I would like use it to figure out how to like put something onto like a MIDI instrument on Fruity Loops. And then I would make
Nice.
these like hip hop beats that were really bad, like very, very, very bad, like me trying to copy that kind of stuff, right? And
Sure.
then don't worry, I'm going to get to my point because this is the important part. Somewhere along those lines, I feel like I realized the thing that I liked about it was the way that the drums sat in the record, right? Like on like the drums and the
Yeah.
bass. And then it doesn't really matter what else, whatever. Like for example, like the song "Kick Push," it's like horns and bass and drums, right? There's not really much else going on. And I
Mhm.
remember being like, oh, like this drum sounds good to me. Like I really like this drum, right? And then one day
Right.
on LimeWire, I downloaded the song "Incinerate" by Sonic Youth. The song had just come out, so it
Nice.
was like '06, right? And that had like the sound of the drums that I liked, and then it had guitar on top of it, and I was like, okay, like, this is cool. This is what I want to like play like. And then I remember trying to figure out how to play that, and this is the first time that I ever used like alternate tunings, which is this was
Yeah.
like I was like really young, like
Mhm.
13 maybe, the 2 years into playing guitar, and I didn't even master like the normal like standard tuning or anything. And then I was like trying
Mhm.
to like I was like, oh man, like this song sounds crazy because it sounds like he's playing the all the strings on the guitar at the same time, right?
Right.
And but it I don't understand how he's doing that if he's playing this melody on top of it. And back then the internet was not the same way that it is now. Like you can't just Google like
Right.
what tuning he was using. Like I remember like literally like looping the song on the computer. Like I would just like play it and I would just try to tune the guitar till it sounded right when it was like open, right?
Mhm.
And then that's how I figured out the tuning for essentially almost every GLOM song because I was just trying to match that tuning, which was not the correct tuning that he actually used, because all the Sonic Youth nerds like have all the tunings like mapped out and everything like that. But
Right.
I just
Right.
like wrote this, I just started playing guitar in that tuning. Around that time, I started playing bass. That was the first band that I had, because I was playing bass in this band. And the
Okay.
music that we were playing was really inspired by like Black Sabbath and Tool, right? And that was like the first time
Okay.
I'd ever heard Tool. And I was playing bass, and as a bass player, like I was really, really into Tool, because I think that his bass sound, the second bass player in Tool, not the first bass player in Tool, the second bass player in Tool has the craziest like
Yeah.
bass sound. Like I don't understand like how he does it. Like I've seen so many YouTube videos about it, like dissecting the tone, and it's like, and people have all the same gear and stuff. It just doesn't sound the
Yeah.
same, because like the guy is like, he's a master.
Tone in the
Like
hands, man.
it's in the hands.
Tones in
It's
the
in the hands.
hands.
It's the way he plays the bass that no
Yeah.
one is able to really capture, right?
Yeah.
And then that
Justin
band,
Chancellor, I believe, is his name.
Chancellor,
Justin
that's right.
Chancellor.
And then that was the band that I started playing shows with, like in public. And then the band transitioned into being like from like a Black Sabbathy thing to being more of like a metal, like hardcore metalcore. I guess metalcore was like kind of new at that point. Like it was, well, I mean, it wasn't new
Yeah.
because people were doing it in the '90s, but like it wasn't like as what we think of what metalcore is now. Like I don't even think like
Right.
at that point, like I don't know, this is not the best metalcore band example, but like I don't even think like the big Trivium record came out at that point when this happened. This
Okay.
was like when I was in like seventh grade, and like the Trivium, I feel like the Trivium record came out when I was in high school, and that was when people were like, oh, like, this is like metalcore,
Yeah.
you know?
I remember it being pretty popular, like 05-ish, I want to say. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
you brought up the tuning business as well, and I noticed that you did play some of your songs in open D tuning, and I was kind of wondering what the inspiration was. But eventually, again, following you on Instagram, I saw you do a Sonic Youth cover at one point, and I was like, okay, this kind of makes sense. But I'm curious to know the story behind using the open tunings primarily, or the alternate tunings, and knowing that you're a Sonic Youth fan beyond just
Yeah.
doing that cover makes a hell of a lot of sense now.
Well, going on top of that is, I feel like just through osmosis, I didn't like, my dad didn't like the two George Harrison sitar songs. Like on like one of them was on Revolver and the other one's on Sergeant Pepper. But the Sergeant Pepper one is crazy to me because like that is one of the first examples of that I heard like as a kid, of like the
Yeah.
drone thing. And I remember like hearing that as a kid, and he would always want to skip the song, and I was like, no, no, like let's listen to it. Like this is a crazy. I didn't know why when I was a kid why I liked it, and then with, the same technique is used on Tomorrow Never Knows and stuff like that too. That's also one of my favorite Beatles songs. But it's like that's like the drone thing, and then like hearing the Sonic Youth thing, 10 years later, it was like that's crazy to me because like he was doing it on guitar, and I was like, oh, like you can
Right.
do that on guitar because so much, like I thought that it was like impossible to do that on the guitar. But then Dear Prudence also has the drone thing, but it's a little less like
Right.
as a finger pick drone. It's a different thing. But it's definitely from those two things. It's like the sitar Beatles songs and then the Sonic Youth
Yeah.
song. That, because at that point in time, I only had that one. I only downloaded one Sonic Youth song at that point, and it was just that one. I
Oh,
just
okay.
kept like looping it around because the other ones don't really have the drone thing. But
Sure.
that one to me is just like very special, and it's kind of based my whole life around this.
Thurston Moore, he would take like guitar sticks and shove them up and like to raise up the
Yeah,
action on his guitar and shit. I got this wacky idea after seeing him do it. I took like a plastic coat hanger and chopped them off and then slid them up the strings and started to
crazy.
like try and play like with a slide with that. It did sound a little bit different, a little bit wonky, but yeah, I wasn't, good enough guitar player to kind of figure it out beyond that. It was just an idea that I had, but yeah, he was quite the experimenter with anything guitar related for sure.
Yeah, and I think what's funny about Thurston's playing, because like now at this point in my life, I'm not an expert in Sonic Youth by any means, but I've listened to a lot of Sonic Youth and I've like read a lot about Sonic Youth, and I think that what the thing with Thurston and Lee Ronaldo specifically is that they are artists and sometimes they wrote good songs, and I think that that's like the thing, because like for me it's like they hit them when they hit the mark that I like, it really resonates with me. But then sometimes they don't hit it for me, for my personal taste, and
Sure.
it's like this is too much. But
Yeah.
they have to hit all of them because they weren't able to get to those really like poignant kind of more like amazing songwriting moments without doing like the crazy stuff. And I think that that's like
Sure.
an important, like their explorations in like guitar is
Definitely.
as a whole is very inspirational to me, because like nobody plays like that, you know? And then
Yeah.
sometimes this magic happens that it's like, yo, like this is like transcendental like song that really, really
Right.
resonates with a lot of people. And then sometimes it's like they put out, they got Diamond Sea is a great song, but it's like 25 minutes of, you know,
Right.
noise, which is fine.
Absolutely.
Of course, I appreciate the noise thing too, but it's like, it's a funny
Definitely.
dichotomy to be like, or like the song, like the, on Dirty, right? The record Dirty. It's funny because I think Dirty was like the beginning of it where they're like trying to write pop songs, but still like doing it in like a noise way, which is like, that's one of my favorite records from them.
Yeah.
It's also one of their most accessible records because it has a more pop sensibility, and it's just
Right.
them doing noise and then singing like hooks, which is like a really funny
Yeah.
dichotomy that's different from their earlier material and then different even from their later material, because their later material
Yeah.
still gets weird, And I think that's like the most like
Absolutely.
90s record that they did, like Geffen, like major label like thing.
At what point would you say that you started gearing yourself toward musically, maybe like what people would recognize as glom? Like when did you kind of feel yourself kind of riding in that trajectory?
Well, are you familiar with the band Yuck?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
the Yuck record came out when I was in 11th grade, and I heard that for
Perfect
the first
album,
time.
first album. Perfect.
Yes, perfect first album. I heard that before I listened to like Dinosaur Jr. or anything like that, right? And
Okay.
so I think that's a common thing that happens with like teenagers specifically. They listen to something that, at least with my, coming up with like in learning about music and like bands and stuff like that, I listened to like the successor to like the original thing a
Yeah.
lot.
Right.
And so that was why, like, for example, with like the Pantera thing, going back to the Pantera thing, it was like I listened to Pantera and I listened to a lot of Pantera, and then I was like, oh, who inspired Pantera? And it was Black Sabbath, and so you listen to Black Sabbath, you
Right.
listen to Slayer. Like I guess Slayer was like a contemporary of Pantera, but with Yuck, I was obsessed with that album. Like I was obsessed. I learned how to play like every song on that record. Watched every video, and at that point in time, it was funny. There wasn't that many videos about them. There was only like there was a Pitchfork
Yeah.
video of them playing on the roof, and there was a Pitchfork video of them playing at Pitchfork Festival. And I remember like
Right.
watching both those videos and like being like dissecting everything about it, like what guitar he was playing. That was the first time I'd ever seen a jazz master, which is funny. And like looking at his pedal board and being like, how does he get these sounds? Like it's so like fuzzy, and it's just like the most basic everything. But and I was obsessed with that. And then that was in 11th grade, and I wrote songs at that point that sounded like that. Like I like wrote 3 or 5 songs that were just literally Yuck copies, right? And
Hmm.
then in college, sorry, 12th grade, that was when I got into the Smiths, right? And so I tried my best to. Oh, and that was around that time was also when I started listening to Dino. So like Dinosaur Jr. and the Smiths. Yuck got surpassed by Dinosaur Jr., My Bloody Valentine, and the Smiths. Those three. That was the big three for me when I was in high school or in senior year. But it was funny because I didn't listen to Loveless. I wasn't a Loveless guy. I liked this one EP by them called "You Made Me Realize," which was '88. This was
Yeah.
before they were actually like a shoegaze band, right?
Yeah.
And that record is really crazy to me because it sounds like a distorted Smiths in the Cure mixed. Like it's like more. It's
Definitely.
not as like
More post
aggressive,
punky.
more post
Yeah.
punk. And like the song "You Made Me Realize" is actually a punk song, so that's why it's like it's fast, it's really fast, and like it's dissonant and stuff like that, whatever. And then I just tried to write songs like that, like those three. And then I think that from that point on, that was when like I tried to write songs that sounded like that. And then for some reason it clicked in like 2018. So that was like 7 years of like writing songs that were not great. And then 2018 writing 10 songs that I liked. And then 2019 writing another 10 songs that I liked. And then 2020 writing 8 songs that I like, and then 2022, 8 more songs, and then with this record that's about to come out, in my opinion, those are the best ones right now. So, and no one's really heard them because they're not out. But
Well,
you
that's the
know,
idea, man, is you just want to keep getting better and better. And I think there's a through line with your music that, not that it was ever bad, as far as the GLOM project's concerned. You can definitely tell your progression as a songwriter and a musician, incorporating and vetting other elements into your music. I'd say, like, obviously with your more recent singles, like the synth elements are a little bit more prominent and really accentuate the songwriting. Little groove and pop and bass lines too have really started to stand out over time too, I think, in your music as well. So, and then you just keep leveling up with your guitar playing.
Oh, stop.
It's really fun to watch you play Glass live because it's so effortless, and of course you're singing at the same time. That little hammer-on pull-off lick thing is you do it really smooth. It's to be commended, and to be able to sing at the same time. That's no easy feat.
Hey, that means a lot. Coming from you, come on. That's great.
Yeah,
That's very, very sweet.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. With the song Glass, I think Glass is like a really funny. Well, of the three songs that have been released from this record already, so that's the song Below, Virginia, and Glass. I think that somehow or another, those three have been the culmination of all of the influences that I have discussed in a way.
Yeah, sure.
Because, like, to me, like, Virginia, the inspiration of, like, the production specifically goes back to what I said about when I first heard In Bloom, because it's like that is what I wanted the guitar to sound like. I wanted the guitar to sound like Mayonnaise, the Smashing Pumpkins song, like In Bloom, like those are all like Butch Vig style guitars, were like really big guitar, really big drums, really big bass, and I think that Glass is a funny one too, because like Glass is like it's not really necessarily me trying to do a Johnny Marr style riff, but it like kind of comes out like that because
I can see it a little bit. Yeah.
I just like love his playing and I like admire his sensibilities as a guitar player. And like I was like, how can I do this and sing, I guess? And so that's why it's not like picked, it's like strummed, but like it's just something that like he just was able to write these riffs that resonate so deeply with people. And the Smiths is a really interesting example because they're a very polarizing band. Some people like absolutely hate it, and some people base their whole lives around it again. So it's like it's a whole funny, it's a funny situation. And then Below is another example of that because it's like that's a slower one. That's that goes into my the My Bloody Valentine Duster like kind of territory or earlier My Bloody Valentine, where it's like just kind of drudging along, groovy still, but it's like very somber.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I just wanted to push myself. I think that was also part of it because like the earlier GLOM songs, like the song I Wanted the Real Thing, which came out in 2022, like that song at the time of writing it and like trying to play it live, like that one was really hard for me to sing and play at the same time. But it's like as the years go by and it's like you get more like muscle memory into it. Like that's like it's like kind of a tough riff still. Like the singing portion of it is like it's kind of involved, and that was really hard for me at the time. And like now it's not, but like that's what happens when you craft. When you work on the craft of the performance element. And Glass was also really hard at first, but then when we went on tour, like the first day of the tour, I was like, oh god, this is hard. And then at the end of the tour, it's like, okay, now I can like do it.
Yeah, not think about it and do it, right? Second nature. What I always like to do with artists that I have on the show in the event that, somebody hasn't ever heard of the artist is try to make references typically for the listeners to pique their interest to, vet and hear the music further outside of the fact, of course. With every episode, we're going to have links in the episode details for people to check out your music, as well as a song at the end of the show and a little clip to lead us in today. So you guys are going to get a taste of what GLOM is all about. But, it's funny that you brought up Yuck earlier because I was like, I didn't know if like Yuck would be too obscure of a reference. I was going to say kind of like a dream pop or bedroom popish leaning Yuck. Might be in a comparison that I'd make. But I thought what might even be cooler with you is to maybe even talk about the accessibility I think that your music is and the ability that you would really have to play with so many of the artists that you even just mentioned. I could see you playing with a Dino J, but
Right.
also could I see you play with Porches, for example. You know,
Right.
I could see you, touring with indie artists. I could see you touring with, garage rock artists. You know, I think there's a little bit of that DNA in everything that you do.
Right.
And obviously, detailing some of your influences in your musical journey, that you've kind of painted that picture for us. It's a hard thing to achieve. And I'm not saying like you're methodically like, how can I be more accessible? But, I think it's a beautiful result of what your inspirations are.
Well, that is a very kind assessment to make, because what's funny about it is that when I, started the project, like the goal was to essentially make music that I wanted to listen to. And that's still like what's funny about it is that, there's definitely people that also say this, and there's definitely people that don't say this, where it's like, they want to do it to make money, but it's like I listen,
Sure.
like ever since I was in high school, when I would be like recording my little songs on like Fruity Loops and like, whatever, I just made it. There was like a streak where I was making it just for myself to listen to on the way to school, and I didn't show like no, I wouldn't email it
Yeah.
to anyone or like whatever. And now what's funny about it is that I want to make music that essentially like 16, 17-year-old me would like. And I think that somehow or another that translates to be like the goal of it having be it's just trying to be simple. Like in like the end of the day, at the end of the day, like the chorus is something that you can sing. Like anyone can sing
Sure.
it, or anyone can sing the verse of the song. Like it's not like too musically like next level for people to not
Sure.
understand. And then deliver it in a package that of the things that I was inspired by, which is like Yuck
Yeah.
or like My Bloody Valentine, Dinosaur Jr., and Smashing Pumpkins, like stuff like that. And I think that
Right.
somehow along the lines, like with this new record, especially, like somehow or another, it did work, at least a little bit. And that's why it's a funny thing to like, for example, the end of this year, like three, we did three supporting tours, and um, one of them was with Starting Line, pop punk band. One of them was
Right.
with Cults, uh, dream pop band from,
Yeah.
and then the last one was with Rival Schools, which is like, like, and I think that that's a funny
Yeah.
like mix, but in a weird way, like all of the audiences appreciated it, which was something that like I wasn't necessarily expecting, but it's very fortunate that it turned out that way. But it's just, I think it's kind of funny that you bring it up,
Sure.
because like it's definitely, again, I'm not like making it to do that, but it's just like it's funny that it
Right.
does work out that way, because it's just like
Right.
I'm just making the stuff that I want to listen to again at the end of the day, but it's just like a funny
Sure.
situation to like be playing
Yeah.
a show
Well, it's a
with.
nice side effect that you have the ability to play with all these amazing artists too, and you don't have to stay in one lane genre wise. I mean, there's eclectic tours. I feel like there's a refocus on that now.
Right, right,
I've seen a couple different ones this year that's had quite the variety of artists on it. Like, for example, I saw the big Knock Loose headlining tour
right,
earlier in the like
right,
early mid spring before summer. It was them. It was Loathe,
yep,
who sounds nothing like Knock Loose,
right,
and Speed,
right,
who I again maybe sounds like earlier Knock Loose, but and then Show Me the Body. So like
right,
four bands that really didn't sound present day like each other.
right.
And I think people are like attracted to that though.
Yeah, yeah,
It kind of brings people together. You get that, I call it the Heinz 57 mix.
right,
It's kind of popular
right,
saying around my parts, but a little bit of everything,
yeah,
and it's something for everybody to enjoy. You can bring your girlfriend, there's something there
right.
for her, there's something for you if she's not into harder stuff or whatever the case is.
It's I think that specifically with modern hardcore shows, like I've discussed this with like our team. I because like earlier in this year, like sorry, later last year, which is 20, and that poster is right there that I'm about to bring up. We played with the band Spiritual Cramp, and I was a big fan of Spiritual Cramp in when they first started. Like I saw them play in Baltimore, like their first like East Coast tour. This was like 2017 or something like this, and we opened for them. And they're like, they're not like a hardcore band, but they have like a hardcore like fan base, and like
Definitely.
their roots are in hardcore, and like
Right.
they're definitely more like the Clash and stuff like that, which is cool. And they're honestly, I'm gonna say right now that I think that they're one of the best live shows. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but every time I've seen them, it's been just an immensely powerful show. And I don't know how else to say it. It's like the closest thing, in my opinion, to like seeing like the Ramones play still. Like it's like an
Nice.
assault, but it's not like hardcore, so it's not like you're drained afterwards or anything, but like
Sure.
Just a very like high energy show. And I said this to like, our team earlier this year, where I was like, I think it'd be really funny to play shows with hardcore bands, or like play shows with like bands that are like, immensely heavy, because like I think that there's a crossover,
Definitely.
and with the rival schools things, it was funny because the rival school shows that we played, and you brought this up, I think, before we even started recording, but rival schools, granted, they have kind of like a wide array of sounds in their catalog, because like the first record is like, post, I guess like more like 90, like alternative rock, and then like the second record is like a post hardcore record, and then like whatever. But that show was funny too, because like the bands were mixed bills, like we played second or third, and then the headliner was obviously Rival Schools, but then the co-headliner was Webbed Wing. I don't know if you've ever seen Webbed Wing play, but
yeah, they're solid.
And it's funny because also like when I was like talking with them, I didn't realize that they were in that band Super Heaven too at the same time. And so they were like, yeah, like our other band, like we're going back out on tour like in a couple weeks, like with our other band. I was like, oh, what's your other band called? They're like Super Heaven. I was like, oh my god, I didn't realize it was you. Like,
yeah.
And I was like, just like with these guys for like we were just like sharing the backstage for like, it wasn't that many days, but it was like just funny to like and then be like, oh my god, like these guys. But I think that was like it's a fun show to see, like, because like GLOM's music definitely is like not that heavy, but like some hardcore adjacent audiences do appreciate it, because like a lot of hardcore people do have a soft spot, I feel like, for
absolutely.
And again, I definitely came up like in the hardcore world, so like I do still appreciate it a lot. I haven't gone to a hardcore show in a long time, but like I appreciate it for what it did for me as a kid, like what it does for a lot of people still, like, and I think it's interesting,
A couple little nuggets you've kind of sprinkled in there that I want to lean into momentarily. One of which, you mentioning that you think it would go off well for you guys to play a hardcore show. I mean, this is a little bit more of a loose example, because I think these guys are a bit avant-garde, even more so present day with the release of Glow On, things like that. But Turnstile, they took JPEG Mafia out on the TLC tour and Snail Mail.
Yep.
I think
they
you
brought
guys
those people out because that was Baltimore, but
that's true. That's true.
But nonetheless, I also lived in Baltimore for a long time, so that was they were always playing around. Like, but again, I that is a great example of it, because that is a fun show, because like JPEG Mafia is. I saw JPEG Mafia play in a parking lot once, like outside. This was like probably like 2016, because like he used to play in Baltimore a lot before he was like where he is now. Turnstile was another example where it was like Turnstile would be playing shows like random places, Angel Dust too, like Trapped Under Ice and stuff like that would be playing like rando spots in Baltimore.
Absolutely.
But it is funny. I remember one time I was at a wedding, because like I have a friend that was pretty, I will not name him, but he was pretty significant in the hardcore world, and it was his wedding, and I was seated at the wedding table. It was with Turnstile. It was just me and then my friend and then Turnstile, and we were just like, we didn't really talk to him, but it was just funny. This is also way before they were like, this is way before 2020, so like before their rise.
Glow On would blow up, right?
But I did see the drummer like 2 years ago in New York, and he was like, "Hey, what's up?" Like from the wedding, right? And I was like, "Oh, that's really funny,"
That's great.
Like, funny that you remember me. And we chatted for like a while. He's like, "You live here? You still live in Baltimore?" I was like, "Oh no, I live here now." But we chatted for a while. Then like my friends like that I was with were like, "I'm the drummer from Turnstile," and I was like, "Yeah." I told you guys I was at this wedding and I met that.
Yeah, they're real ones, man. They're really, really great people. And then the other thing that you brought up as well, it kind of made me think of, I listen to various podcasts when I have the time. Making a podcast takes up a lot of time, and still a music fan. Try to listen to a lot of music. Occasionally try to noodle around myself. Got a family, so I'm a busy guy. But I did catch a portion of. I'm not quite done with it. Toby Morse from H2O, lead singer, has his own podcast, and he just had Pat Flynn on from Half Heart and Fiddlehead.
Yep.
And he was kind of talking about how they had just done Sound and Fury. I guess they recorded this right after it. The episode just finally came out. Sound and Fury was, I think, on my birthday weekend, so like July 14th, 13th and 14th, I think, this year, out in LA. And they Half Heart headline one night and Fiddlehead headline the next night.
Right.
And he was kind of talking about, too, kind of this point that we're making, that there is in the hardcore world those folks that do connect with the softer side of music. There was a guy standing in the crowd. He said he saw wearing a Marauder shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he was there for both nights at both headlining sets. But whenever Fiddlehead played, he was actually literally singing the words to his songs. And some of those Fiddlehead songs are about Pat's relationship with his wife over the years and things like that. Right. So in particular, he was singing a love song, and the guy was singing along with him. And he said that just was one of the most striking memories he had of a recent, playing a live show. The fact that, there really are people out there that aren't always hard and look for that emotion in music.
Yeah, I think Fiddlehead is a really good example of what I'm talking about, or what we've been talking about rather, because they definitely have some heavier music, but it's funny that they utilize the alternative rock thing in a way that in like the songwriting thing, not to say that hardcore people don't, but I'm saying like that, like Fiddlehead utilizes like the emotional element, and you can like really tell, like, and it strikes a chord with a lot of people. Like people really there's definitely people out there that don't necessarily like Have Heart anymore, and they like Fiddlehead because like those songs, like the last Fiddlehead record was really good to me. It really
excellent.
It really struck a chord with me, and I think that that's a band that I would really like to play with and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great band for you guys to play with, and as Colin Young would say, "Motherfuckers be singing." So
That's right.
Man, wonderful stuff. You kind of touched on a little bit. It had to be special too to be playing with Rival Schools because Walter is such a master. Quicksand's one of my all-time favorite bands.
Yep.
Gorilla Biscuits. He's got quite the eclectic experience in the scene. Northeast hardcore in particular. I mean, the roots are deep with that guy. I mean, that had to be a real treat.
Yeah, and like this is funny because we only did 2 shows with them, but the first show we did, I didn't really talk to anyone. On that first night, the only person in the band that I talked to was Sammy, the drummer, who is a legend, because he was, Youth of Today's drummer. Like, his resume is extremely insane. Like 15-year-old me was like losing it, and I was like just talking to him, and it was like such a funny like situation, because this is what was funny about it. The show that we played with them was on a night in New York in which the Mets and the Yankees were both in playoff games. And he was like, and I remember like saying, like introducing myself, and I was like, hey, thanks so much for having us. Like, means a lot to be playing with you guys. Like, you guys are my heroes. Like, well, all true. I wasn't just, fluffing, but he was like, man, I'm gonna tell you right now, playing shows in New York in October is really hard. And I was like, why? And he was like, one time he said, I don't remember what band it was. It was either Judge or Shelter, or like it was one of the later bands. It wasn't Youth Today. So they were playing a show in Brooklyn, and it was on a World Series night. And it was when the Yankee, it was like a Yankees World Series. And he was like, dude,
probably late 90s.
There was no one there. That's what he said. He was like, and we were like really like stressed about it. And like no one was there. And he was like, but tonight, we might be okay, And it did turn out fine, but it was just funny that like that was the first thing he said. He's like, man, playing during baseball season, it's really hard, man. Like, it's just not,
Oh yeah.
And then after the second night, I got to meet Walter, and he is just so nice. That's it. Like, it was just like such a kind interaction that was like, didn't have to be that nice. How legendary this guy is. Like, I expect not, like, every time we open for people, like, I'm not going to throw these people under the bus necessarily, because like I get it, because like as when we did our first real headline tour this year, I was like, I kind of understand like why people don't want to talk to, because you're so burnt and stuff like that. But like we opened for Block Party, and I didn't meet them, and like they didn't, like we were on the same like our room was next to the singer from Block Party, and he didn't come out
Yeah.
the entire time, and I was like kind of bummed because I was like, man, I would love to meet him. Like, I don't want to force anything. I'm not gonna like knock on
Sure.
his door and be like, hey, I want to meet you. You know, you're my hero. Like, I was obsessed with you, and like when I heard you on
Yeah.
Tony Hawk, but I don't think that anyone, no one owes me anything. You know what I mean? Like, none of the like
Sure.
people that we open for,
Sure.
like, no one has to say anything. And Walter was really
Sure.
kind.
That's cool to hear. People that I idolize, I always like to hear that stuff about them. Like for example, a few episodes ago, we talked to Cold God, Matt Wainwright, and they got to do the Deftones festival back in, I think it was 2022, and they didn't have any expectation of meeting Deftones themselves. They had to open up
Right.
the festival, and they actually even came out to the side stage. Chino and all them met him like 5-10 minutes
Wow.
before they played, talked to all of them.
That's sick.
Even stood at the side stage and watched their entire set, and told them good set after they got off the stage and everything. And that's incredible to hear a band at that level, at that height, to take the
Yeah.
time. And I know they do an intention of, they actually, select these bands to do their
Oh yeah,
festival,
yeah.
and they intentionally find, like underground bands and do an eclectic mix, kind of like what we've been talking about
Right.
of bands. But I love hearing those stories about people, at least for me, people that I idolize, that I think are important in the music spectrum over the years, that they're taking the time to, whether it's, you never even know, just like what the kindness does for
Yeah.
those that are coming up
It was
behind them
very
too.
like when we played with Starting Line, like everyone in the starting line was like so nice to us. Like, which was like, they
That's
were like
awesome.
nicer than they had to be. Like, they, we didn't, you know, of all the people that we've opened for, like, we've met, I mean, like, I don't think I've met any of the other people that we opened for, like, on like the bigger side of things. Like, we opened
Yeah.
for Block Party, we opened for Thievery Corporation, we opened for Explosions in the Sky. Like, didn't meet any of them, which is
Oh,
fine,
damn.
totally fine. Like,
Yeah.
but then with the starting line, granted, with the starting line, we were doing 4 days with them, but like with starting line, like they were like
Yeah.
every day, like, so like, oh, what'd you guys do today? Like, like you go to the beach, like, like, and I was like, what did you guys do today? It's like, oh, we just chilled, like, like, and we're just like chatting like the whole time, and like that just meant a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Here's a funny story though. Um, we played a festival over the summer that was OAR's festival. Remember OAR, the band?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And we played their festival in Maryland, and uh, they, the main guys from OAR, they did what Deftones did to the other guy's band. Like, he was
Okay.
like, he came up to he came I think he came up to me in a funny place. It was like in like the bathroom or something. He's like, hey, like, thanks so much for coming. Like,
Oh,
he
wow.
really, and I was like, oh, that's really nice.
That
Like,
is nice.
the headliner for the festival was literally like the Killers and like Blink-182 and like Dave Matthews Band, and the guy from OAR is like talking to me in the bathroom about like he liked the band. Like, that was like something that was like
Yeah.
very kind. Didn't need to be that
Wow.
kind.
I have a good friend that's in the band Fister. They're relatively popular underground
Mhm.
doom metal band, and out of the Midwest here, out of St. Louis. And they got to hop on the Explosions of the Sky. They only wanted one opener,
Yep.
and they let the venue select them. So they called our guys, the locals,
That was
Fister,
the
and
tour that we
they
did,
ended up
by the
opening.
way.
Okay,
It
yeah,
was
the end tour.
the end, yeah.
Okay, I was going to ask when that syncopated time was.
They were, I mean, that was a really cool concept. And it was
Absolutely.
funny because when we played with them, I guess that most of the other bands didn't have vocals that opened for them. Because, like, when
Yeah.
we went out there, like, one of the stage hands, like, put a mic up. And I remember, like, when the mic went up, when I was walking out, I heard someone, like, in the front row say, oh, vocals. And I thought that that was really funny.
Yeah,
Because it's like, like,
that's
Explosions is,
great
like, one of the sickest bands, like, ever.
for
But
sure.
it's 2 hours of just like film score, which
Yeah,
is epic. But it was just like a funny,
absolutely.
like, they, like, we
Yeah,
play our little 30 minutes, they just immediately throw the mic away, and then like they come out and they just like,
yeah,
no acknowledgement, no talking or anything, and just walk off, which is sick. You know,
sure, absolutely. Yeah, Pelican and Russian Circles are getting ready to play. I have a tour here, I think, in starting in February. I'm
nice.
curious to see if they have any locals hop onto that, and what that might attract or what they
I
might do.
wonder because it's funny. I met Russian Circles once because I used to work at a high end clothing store. I still kind
Mhm.
of work. I still work for them. company wise. I don't work in the store anymore, but I was a really, really big fan of I'm blanking on the name of the record right now, but there was a record that came out in like 2008, I believe, that I was really into. That's long story short. And they came in uh, to the store that I used to work at, and I hadn't seen like a photo of them in a long time because I didn't follow them on Instagram or anything, and I was like, you look like a little familiar to me. There's a lot of funny stories about this store, by the way, of like meeting like you know semi celebrities and
Sure.
and real celebrities, but they came in and they were like buying some stuff, and I was like, you guys look really familiar. Like, you guys in like a band? And then the guy's like, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, we have a band. We're called Russian Circles. I was like, oh my god, I like love. I was like
Yeah.
such a huge fan of you guys. Like when I was younger, like this is like where you guys go. Like we're just like chatting for a while, and then
Yeah.
they left, and I was like, that's. And then no one else in the store like knew who they were. It was like they're not like
Yeah.
a lot of like people aren't into heavier music, and so I was like, yo, like
Sure.
that band was so like I was obsessed with them when I was in like 11th grade. You know,
Yeah. So
so.
probably Station was about that time, I
I think
think.
it was yeah, and then there was the live record that came
Yeah.
out later that was also
Right.
good. Um,
Yeah.
but the song that I liked was "Young Blood," and then there was a song
Oh
called
yeah.
"Death Rides a Horse" that was also sick. I think those were from two different
Yep.
albums, but I had like
Yeah.
I had a lot of their music at that point, but those were the ones that I liked on my little MP3 player.
Well, I'm really looking forward to what you guys have in store. I know you mentioned, a full length album is in the horizon. Do you have an idea as to when that's going to be coming out, or can you talk about that at all?
Um, I should not, but it
Okay,
will be
fair
soon.
enough.
I've been saying FYI, I've been saying soon for literally a year, but it will come
Sure.
out. It will come out one day, you know. And
Right.
then let me just put it this way: when it does come out, then there will be a stream. There will be a lot of stuff coming out once it comes out, and I will
Very
not
good.
say when, but it will. There will be. There, I have a lot of music ready to
Hell yeah.
go, so
Hey,
we'll
that's
see.
exciting.
You know, I think that I don't know. I'm just like, excited for people to hear it. Like I think
Sure.
that this record, like Glass, the one that Glass is on, is like that is my favorite currently. That record. So, and my favorite songs are not Glass and not Virginia, except I do like those songs a lot, and playing those songs
Sure.
means a lot to me. But there's some other songs on that record that really, go all out for me, and so
Sure.
we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens. We've been playing the whole record live, FYI. Like so at our live shows, like
Very good.
majority of it is new songs, but and so people are always like, yeah, like what's that song called? Like, is that on streaming? And I'm like, no,
Sure.
but
Sure.
it will be one day, and then
Hey,
we'll see.
it's cool to get out and vet it in front of people though too, and kind of get that feedback. I like that experience as well. I just had the exact same thing happen with like Better Lovers. I caught them on their first tour before
Hmm.
they even had the full length out, and they weren't even done like writing that shit. I've listened to the Downbeat podcast and found out like they literally didn't even know what they were doing with some of the songs because they just literally had never had time to get together and stuff.
Right,
Craig had his own solo stuff going on. He's touring with Jerry Cantrell.
right,
Will Putney records a fuck ton of bands. He's in two other bands. He's
right.
Fit for an Autopsy and End, and so they
Yeah,
all had so much shit going on. It was weird to hear that they were like writing those records live while they were
yeah,
playing. And when I
dude. I
first
think
heard the new album, I was like, "This sounds weird but familiar to me." And it was validated by listening to that podcast where they're like, "Oh yeah, we played these
right.
songs live, but these are not at all what they were when we first started playing them."
It's funny that you bring that up because I think one of the things that actually like inspires me a lot is like comedy, like stand-up
Yeah,
comedy, because uh my girlfriend and I live across the street from a comedy venue, and so
hell yeah,
we've we've taken a break from going to shows, but recently, we've gone to a lot of comedy shows, a lot of the same comedians. Like there's like this one like crew of comedians that we used to go see a lot, and we watched all of them essentially write their specials at the show. Like so, like the special would come out like probably a year after like we were seeing them like workshop the joke, and I think that like that seeing that process really inspired me to take that kind of approach with songwriting, where it's like
yeah,
I want to, because I used to, the old process for GLOM, even with this upcoming record, was I wrote everything first, we recorded it, and then we started to play it like the recording. And now I want to play the songs first before we record them and see what happens, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is, I don't know, I kind of picked that up from the comedy thing. Haven't done it yet, but
Sure.
I've seen a lot of
Plan
comedy shows,
to
watch them do the
plan
jokes,
to
you
do
know?
it. Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, we'll see what happens, but I think,
Yeah.
I don't know, I want to take it a little bit slower as opposed to forcing my
Yeah,
process
for
is a
sure.
little uh, all over the place with
Yeah,
recording.
it's
So,
important to do whatever you're doing, do it organically, and what feels right, what comes naturally.
right,
Um, and playing as long as you have to. I'm sure there's a shorthand even with the guys that you play with.
right,
Kind of each other's ticks and little preferences or whatever the case is. So
right,
it's nice to have that shorthand with folks too. It's hard to you don't want to throw too many wrenches in the chemistry, I guess, is the short of what I'm saying.
right. It's definitely a valid statement, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious with the love for some comedy. Who are some of your favorites out there?
I like the alt scene.
Okay.
Like, I think, like, we used to go see, so I have a friend who is a comedian that is named Gavin Matz. Like, I like him a lot. I think he's very funny.
Mhm.
We played a show with him actually, like in September at the venue that I live across the street from. But we
Cool.
we played that show, and I was like watching him work, and I was like, this is inspirational to me. And I like there's another comedian named Joe Pera that I like a lot, who had a show on uh, Adult Swim. And I like Connor O'Malley.
Yeah.
And I like I've never really, I haven't seen Tim Robinson do stand up, but I like his
Sure.
style of comedy, like in like
Definitely.
the Detroiters style, like I think you should leave style
Yeah.
jokes. And then I also like
Yeah.
who do I like? I'm trying to think. There's a
To
lot of
me, it almost
comedians
has
who,
a similar beats or vibes to shit from like the State and Human Giant and Whitest
yeah,
Kids You Know. Yeah, it comes
definitely,
some of that sketch
definitely.
stuff that's kind of more fringe.
Mr. Show, like
Yeah,
Arrested
Mr. Show.
Development. I think that like
Yeah,
the Arrested Development style of comedy is very inspirational to me, and I think that I don't know, like obviously like I don't make like like funny content like per se,
but
but
there's some humorous stuff in there.
yeah, I'll throw a
I
joke
love
in
how you
every once in a while.
capitalized on the. I love how you capitalized on the Oasis. You know, coming back together to announce what other shows you had in the works. You
Yeah,
between and while they were trying to look for openers and stuff, I felt like that was a
I just
moment
saw
seized.
I saw that poster up like in Brooklyn, and I thought it was okay. Like let me also preface this. I love Oasis, so I'm not trying to like
Sure.
talk shit about them. But I saw that poster, and for some reason, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. Like, there's just something about it where it's like it's funny to me that like Liam is still like that.
Yeah.
Like Noel, whatever. Like Noel, Noel is so rich that it's hard to, he's going to be a little slightly out of touch, I feel like. But
Sure.
Liam
Definitely.
Gallagher to still have the like
Chippy.
like
Yeah.
bratty football hooligan like persona
Yeah.
is really funny to me.
Definitely.
And so seeing that poster, and I was like, I just gotta like Photoshop myself in. Like I
Yeah.
think that would be funny, and I
Definitely.
guess it was funny. Like,
I like that you're kind of self-deprecating at times as well. Like a lot of people want to put like isolated like their greatest hits, if you will, on social media, and you're not
right.
like afraid to put something up. Like I know you do like street performances and stuff sometimes. So you were hammering out a Chapel Roan song, I noticed, and somebody was criticizing you for forgetting the second verse or whatever. And I was like, most people wouldn't put this up. I love that he put this up.
I my philosophy with social media, I think that a lot of people, for people who have been on Instagram since the beginning, which is, I've been on Instagram since the beginning. I have not been on TikTok since the
Same.
beginning, but I was close to the beginning. And I'll say that people definitely, that we had an era on Instagram where people were taking it extremely seriously, like too seriously. Like everyone was
Yeah.
like curating their life to be like a certain thing, and everything was like a very like particular aesthetic and like fit into this
Yeah.
like algorithmic bubble of what like you should
Right.
strive for as a human being, right? Specifically like in like a consumerist way, right? I think that social media shouldn't be like that. I think it's a unique a unique opportunity to show who you really are, you know. And so
Sure.
my uh, philosophy around specifically reels, like for example, like I think that it's funny. It's funny to me that more like bands don't treat the reels like garbage. Like I think that I find it funny that bands are afraid, at least in my perception, are afraid to post covers on the internet because I don't
Sure.
know. It does, you know, there it is a risky situation because like a lot of people like
Yeah.
think of you as like the cover
To the
person, right?
wolves. To the
But I
wolves.
think that like for
Yeah.
me personally, like in my mentality behind it, it's like not every one of those covers. This isn't true for not for every one of the covers that I post, but a lot of the covers that I do post will be something that I've tried to challenge myself to learn that moment, right? So like I'll be like noodling on it the night before, and then like at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, I'll just like hit the record button and then just try to like do it, right? And I think that like it doesn't need to be precious. Like your feed doesn't need to be like super curated. And I think that
Sure.
like that's why I'll just like put up a cover every day. Like if I can't think of any other like any other content or like you know it doesn't need to be like people don't want to be sold something all the time. That's what I'm gonna say.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I don't want the GLOM page to be some me trying to sell the band to you. Like I want to provide
Sure.
something that I think is fun, as opposed to like
Yeah.
you don't have to go buy a ticket to a GLOM show. You know, you can
Sure.
just watch these like
Yeah.
stupid videos that I'll post. You know,
Yeah. This is who you are, and this is what you do, and you're either along for the ride or you're not. It's just that simple, really.
that's right.
Uh, the only beef I got with you is your merch
Okay.
and the fact that it's a little Yankees leaning, and I'm not a Yankee fan personally.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
in my top three most hated teams in the MLB probably. Uh, they're not at the top of the list. Well, I'd say probably four on the list. So we're in the National Central. Cardinals are
Yep.
god around here.
Right.
So I gotta hate the Cubs number one. Cincinnati's not far behind, and Milwaukee
Right.
probably. But then the Yankees are probably right there at number four for me.
You know,
Got
it's
to
also
admit.
funny about the Yankees thing, and like you know, I'm not a baseball fan. Like I'm not. I definitely enjoy baseball. I don't follow baseball per se. But what I'm going to say is what's funny is that the Yankees logo is a really funny phenomenon to me because
Oh, it's iconic. Yeah.
it's a weird situation because, you know, granted there are two baseball teams in New York. There's the
Right.
Yankees and then the Mets, of course. But I think what's funny about it is that somehow or another, along the lines, the Yankees logo became the logo for New York City. And I think that
Right.
that's why it's funny. Like,
Sure.
I know that, like, you know, you're saying this in jest, but it's funny because, like,
Right.
you see, like, I'm just gonna say, like, there's 90% of the people that wear Yankees hats in New York City, like, don't like the Yankees. Like, they're not like baseball people. They just wear it because they found that hat at, like, a store, you know, like, and
Sure.
where I'm going with this is that we played in Boston once. This was like 2022. We played in Boston at like a house show, and then I got us a hotel in Foxborough, right? And this is where it's going to get funny. I was wearing a Yankees hat, and I forgot that I was wearing a Yankees hat. And then we went into this. The hotel was attached to this like gnarly like Patriots bar, right? And then we walk in there, and then the bartender is also like the hotel like clerk, and he's like, "Here's the key to your room.
Nice.
Like you just walk through that way." And like meanwhile, when we walked in there, I was wearing the Yankees hat. The entire bar like just went like completely silent, right? Like people were playing pool. They stopped playing pool. Like there's probably like 50 people in there, and they stopped playing pool. They stopped drinking, like drinks down, like everything, just staring. And then we like the moment we like crossed the threshold into the hotel, like someone just yells out, they're like, "Yo, fuck the Yankees!" And then everyone like cheered in the bar, and then we like left. And I was like, this is insane
Yeah.
because that logo doesn't mean the same thing in New York that it does like outside of New
Sure,
York, which is
sure.
really funny, you know?
Yeah.
And I just think it from like a humorous standpoint. It's funny too because we did a collab with my friend's brand called 316. This is like a clothing brand. And he said the same thing. He was like, "We got to do the collab, and we'll do like the hat, but like we can't do a Yankees like logo." And I was like, "Dude, it's not about it. I'm not a Yankees fan, you know." He's
Yeah.
like, "We got to do it with the
Yeah.
Mets logo, though. We got to do it with the Mets logo." And I was like, "Okay, we'll
Yeah.
do it with the Mets logo."
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I assume you're just capitalizing on the fact that the band's from New York and it's Yankees. You know,
Well,
I
here's the other
didn't.
thing. I've been trying to make merch that has rips of every like a lot of sports logos. Like that's another one of
Sure.
my like things because I always like want like fantasized about doing a glom like dumb glom hat with the Orioles logo, but the problem with because like there's an O in glom and there's an O in the Orioles
Right.
thing, but the Orioles logo is hard because there's an apostrophe S, and that's like
Yeah.
a little too much. Like if I removed it, you couldn't tell that it was a Orioles hat
Yeah.
because it would be like an
Yeah.
Ole Miss hat or like it could be like
Right.
something else. Because like the
Definitely.
Yankees logo is the one that like you don't have to remove anything, and like people like
Right.
always like you know. So I'm gonna find the right thing though. I'm gonna find the right
Yeah.
thing. You know.
I am a fan of the cat incorporated merchandise, though.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
big
yeah,
fan of
yeah.
cats. I noticed little buddy popping over your shoulder there a moment ago. We're
Yeah.
always big fans of the cat run-ins.
Yeah, she means well, you know. She means well, and she has no
Big
idea
fan.
that there's a shirt about her, you know.
Really?
I mean, I don't think showed her once. She didn't say anything. I'm trying to do a
She didn't
dog
seem to have
one
much
next.
of an opinion.
That's the next thing, but we don't have a dog. But I was thinking about doing a dog one.
Where are we leaning on breed of dog?
The dog that I drew for the shirt was like probably like a border collie. I would say like it has like black and white spots,
Okay.
and like the ears were black, and then that was the what I drew, but it doesn't have like a dog. It's like I love Snoopy, and so like Snoopy's a black and white dog, of course. So
Yeah. I
what
could
do you
see
do?
Snoopy working. I could see that
Well, I
working
already
for you.
did a Snoopy shirt. I didn't post it online because I was afraid that they're going to sue, but uh, that was a good shirt. The shirt
Nice.
was Snoopy wearing a Glom shirt.
I could get down with that. Why rest on the name Glom? Out of curiosity,
Oh,
are
okay.
you are you a thief? Did you steal something other than my heart?
um, well, there's a couple. I'll give two answers. There's two answers,
All right.
and the first one, which is PG, is it's not really like a R-rated answer, but I when I was in high school, my friends and I were really the people that I started Glom with. We were really into the Strokes. We really liked the
Okay.
band The Strokes, as most people who were teenagers and whatever
They're great.
did, right?
Great.
And I read this book called Meet Me in the Bathroom about the
Mm.
Strokes, and there was a line like pretty early on in the book. It's not just about the Strokes; it's about everyone. I don't know if you've ever read that book. It's about like the entire
Yeah, they
New York
actually
music scene.
just did a documentary last
Yep.
year, I think,
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Went to that premiere, which was fun. But what's funny about it is that
Nice.
the documentary ends. The book goes way more in depth. The documentary stops like 9/11, and the book goes up until like 2010, which I think. And so there's like there's so much that
I didn't know that.
couldn't be made into the movie because they
Mhm.
in there was a Q&A uh at that premiere, and it was one of the guy from Moldy Peaches was like
Mhm.
involved, and he was funny. But the filmmaker and like the person who wrote the book and stuff like that, and basically like they were trying to make the the documentary like a show, like a TV show, like or like
Yeah.
a mini series. But then they ran out of money, so they just made it like
Ah.
a movie, and so the movie stops like when LCD Sound System starts as a band, as opposed to the book, which ends with the last LCD Sound System show, I think. Well, the first
Yeah.
last LCD Sound System show. All right, whatever. But there was a
Right.
line
Right.
early on in that book that is like the line in that book was even before they were a band, the members of the Strokes would go to the bar and people would glom onto them. And I
Gotcha.
had never like heard that word before. And I never saw it, and like I was like, "Oh, that's a cool name. Like that's a really cool word."
Yeah.
And I didn't quite
Yeah.
look. I didn't even like look up what it meant. I just like immediately like just like noted it. And
Right.
the R-rated version of that story is that I like graffiti, like I'd never like I don't like actually do it, but like I always like was like I would like draw names and stuff, and like the name that I saw that and I was like, oh, I could like draw this like graffiti, you know. And then
Yeah,
we ended up just naming the band GLOM instead,
that's
and then I
cool.
would put the graffiti on shirts instead.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very cool reason. Unique, unique. Yeah, glom's one of those words that kind of has different meanings in different contexts too. So I
Oh
was
yeah,
sure that
yeah,
there was
yeah.
something beyond the textbook, one I threw at you to make a joke.
No, that's definitely like that's the it also kind of fits too because like there's so much of like, I don't think that people like maybe necessarily clock this, but there's so much about like GLOM's catalog that, in my opinion, is stolen. So like,
I get it.
it's a lot of
Yeah, no, I
like
like
the
that.
influences and stuff aren't necessarily veiled. So that's something
Yeah,
that is important to note about the name.
absolutely.
But at the end of the day, also, I think it just looked good on a shirt. So
Yeah,
again, I don't
I
want
think
to
so
be
too.
here just trying to
Yeah,
sell people stuff, but it's like
yeah.
I I think
Well,
of things in like that regard a lot because I'm like, what would look cool? Because coming from hardcore too, like dude, like all like
yes,
the iconic like hardcore band shirts and stuff like that like resonate
right.
with me. So like
Collegiate
I don't know,
font and
yeah, like it's just like in a lot of regards, it's like bad design from like a like from like a fashion sense. It's like a terrible like design shirt, like death metal shirts and like
sure,
hardcore like maybe not hardcore death metal, but like hardcore band shirts. Like it's
right,
just like basic legible font on a shirt with like a picture on it, and it's like that
right,
like is like that when we were trying to figure out the name of the band, I like really like leaned into wanting it to be one word. Like I was like
sure.
even before I read the word glom, like one of the other ideas we had for the names was we wanted to name the band Pear, Pear, and then we wanted to name the band Coffee, and then we wanted to name the band. I'm trying to remember what else we had a lot of names, like a lot of like
I
weird,
was gonna
like
say
dumb.
glom's winning so far.
Glom
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
was
yeah,
just funny at one point because I was like, I would always like the moment I had an idea for a name, I would just like immediately start like making like stuff with it, like just like on like Photoshop,
yeah.
and like
Sure.
Pear was one of the ones that I was like, oh, this is easy because like you just like put a pear on the shirt, and it's like that's the shirt. I don't remember why we didn't go with Pear. That was kind of a hard name.
Yeah. I like glom. I like
No,
glom.
Glom's
It's
good. Glom's
different.
good.
Yeah, yeah. I can't say I've ever recall ever hearing a band using or incorporating it in any way. And I
Yeah,
like hearing about the, we'll just put it simply, like the fashion sense or the aesthetic of the band. I think that's somebody speaking with some sage wisdom or having some, educated thought in the sense that, as a band, especially nowadays, it's something that if you want to get yourself out there, if you want, I call it the sniff test, if you will, the
right,
passerby, if you will, to catch those people's attention.
right,
You have to have the whole package in order. And if you're
right,
already kind of visually have a vision for your band as well, how you want to present yourself too, you're kind of playing 4D chess while everybody else is playing checkers.
right. I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's very, very important. So, man, you've been so generous with your time tonight, and I really appreciate getting to know you better. I want to give you the opportunity to let folks know what you have on the horizon, things that you can talk about, upcoming shows or events, and where people should stay in touch best with GLOM.
Well, I don't know quite what's next, but I know that you can follow on Instagram at New York Glom. You can follow on TikTok if it doesn't get banned at New York Glom,
Right?
and on YouTube it's also New York Glom, and then on the website is HT, https:// glom.world. I paid
Yes,
extra
and
for that domain.
yes, I like that too. That part of what you guys do is unique. Is it's a dot world domain,
Yeah.
and very easy, slick website as well. Again, get back to that comment I made earlier about having your ducks in a row as far as aesthetics and stuff. Like there's a parity there that you can see across all of your platforms, that everything's in sync, if you will. And
Well,
you guys definitely know what you're doing. So
hey, I
I really
appreciate it.
appreciate I appreciate everything you guys are doing, man. It's a real joy to see somebody that gets it, and and just have such wonderful influences. And the stuff that you share, you're just real, and it's refreshing. Love seeing the family stuff, like I mentioned earlier, man. It's just it's special, man. Keep it up.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It means a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Just live a little. I don't even know it's alright to live a little. Everybody knows a demon inside their own head. You can never know for sure just where it's going. I don't even know where mine went or where I'm going.
Hey there, this is Barrett from the ATI Podcast, here to talk about what we have going on the ATI Podcast Network. First, we'll start with Waxing On with R&J. The format of Waxing On with R&J is audible selections made exclusively by our hosts and brothers, Ridge Jackson and Jake Jackson. Waxing On with R&J is sure to tickle your inner eardrums with some of the most vile tones you've ever encountered, and conversely, ear candy with pop melodies, focusing on spotlighting underground and rising artists. Waxing On with R&J is another outlet of the ATI podcast community to bring awareness to many musicians' craft. Also found on the ATI Podcast Network, Nod Narb's Closet, hosted by Brandon Stewart of Edos Inn. Nod Narb's Closet is a wing of the ATI podcast programming that delves into the world of role-play games, miniature painting, diorama making, occasional pro wrestling match watch-alongs, providing commentary with a dash of jocularity and satire, and much, much more. Of course, leading the pack is the ATI Podcast. On the ATI Podcast, we episodically invite guests onto our show to spotlight their talents, whether that's musicians, filmmakers, artists, actors, businesses, even athletes. Nothing is off the table. The focus of the ATI Podcast and its collective creative arms, whether that's waxing on with R and J or Nod Nard's Closet, is to bring awareness and focus to people's talents. Be sure to follow us across all traditional podcasting platforms, and for the full experience, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search the ATI Podcast. Stay safe out there.